Welcome, everybody, to Fergo and Freak. My name is the Glorious League Freak. This is episode 299 of the podcast. So the next one we bring up 300. And we've got a very special guest. She's somebody that I follow on Twitter. Her name is Beck. Hey, Beck, how are you?
Hello, I'm good. How are you?
I'm pretty good. Now, you're a South Sydney supporter, and we've heard news tonight that Adam Reynolds looks like he's signed a multi-year deal to go to the Cronulla Sutherland Sharks. What do you think about that? It feels like it's a bit sad.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a bummer. I guess, like, in a way you could probably compare Adam Reynolds to John Sutton, like very much a legend of the club. I think most people, whether they're a South supporter or not, would associate him with South Sydney. He's a South Sydney boy, like, through and through. Once the contract saga sort of came out in the media, I was like, oh, this is a bit of a shit situation. Like, It's a bit of a bugger. Like, good on him if that's what he needs. I think that the Sharks will probably really use him more as like a rebuild. Very similar to what the Cowboys are doing with their halves with Chad Townsend. But yeah, I think I've heard that we've got some good kids coming through. I have seen them play. I mean, they know Adam Reynolds. But yeah, I don't know. I guess that's the nature of the business. It's a bit shit. It'd be good if he could sign on just the 1 year. I think Souths, in a way, are probably doing the right thing in the sense that they did the same thing with Sawali, where they're standing their ground. But in the same sense, it's a bit crap. That's two really big players or really big names in the league that have been let go because they're not budging. So that'll be a really big loss.
Yeah, and the thing that gets me too is that they were saying they didn't want to give him a longer term deal because of his age, and yet one of their best players over the last month has been Benji Marshall, who's, 36 or something. It just, I don't know, it made no sense to me because it's not as though you watch Reynolds play and he looks like a player that's physically about to break down. He looks pretty good, in terms of his health. And, I mean, his form is absolutely the best of his career. He's outstanding. It just seems like a weird one, especially when you consider that his halves partner is a year older than him. And, I can see them wanting to retool the club and not get old all of a sudden. But, this is a premiership window they've got here. I just think it's a weird situation to let go, especially of a halfback that's already proven he can win you a premiership.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's probably the weirdest bit. And we've been in the premiership window for a couple of years, making like the prelims, 3 years in a row now. So I think, we're really close. And I think from Adam Reynolds' perspective too, if he goes to another club, is he still going to have that opportunity to have that window available to him as well? When they were talking about him going to North Queensland, it was a bit of a funny one in the sense that they're right in the middle of a rebuild. They probably won't be looking at the premiership window for quite a while now, at least a couple of years. And yeah, we do have a few, we've got a pretty young side in comparison to others in the sense that there's, like, last year we had a really young pack. But I think it's also the cap space as well, because they've got heaps of players coming off contract. They need to re-sign Cody Walker next year too. I think it's a bit odd that they're prioritising, or it sounds like they're going to prioritise that over giving Reynolds a long-term deal. But in the same sense, yeah, I don't know. Like, if we've been that close to winning a premiership the last few years, is it really wise to be letting him go? If we don't get there this year, surely in the next few years we should at least crack a grand final. Whether we win it or not, who knows? But yeah, it's a bit of a weird one. Benji Marshall, I was like a bit skeptical when we signed him. I thought that was a very strange signing, considering the fact that we had Cody and Adam and they've both been outstanding the last few years. But he has brought like pretty good value, but then they're also talking about him maybe not playing on next year as well. So that leaves us in a bit of a predicament, because you sort of want your halfback there to guide the team around the field, and can a young kid do that? I mean, Sam Walkers don't grow on trees. Good halfbacks don't grow on trees. So I guess it's sort of, it's an interesting situation in the sense that they probably want to start blooding the younger players so we don't get to the situation where we're keeping the older players on the field and losing all of our juniors to other clubs and losing all the talent that we've got coming through. But it's a bit of a sad one. I think it'll be very uncomfortable to see him in different colours. But if he does go to Cronulla, good on him. I think him and Sean Johnson would make a really good halves pairing, provided that Sean stays injury-free. And if he stays at the club as well.
Yeah, they've got, who knows what the Sharks are doing. At least now, I guess, you could see why they got rid of Townsend. But, it's a pretty good starting block to get an Adam Reynolds there as they, rebuild that club. The other thing about the Sharks that's a little bit interesting is they're looking to get younger next year. And to bring in a experienced halfback, it's great in terms of he'll be able to guide the team around the park and things like that. But it's not as though I would say the Sharks are in a premiership window.
No.
And, but when they offer you that much money and, you got the feeling that he didn't want to leave Sydney. And, the only other teams that really could have offered him big money were going to be the West Tigers, who don't offer money to players until it's November. And then the only other one that I think could have come up for him might have been Parramatta if Moses moves on. What would you think if the Rabbitohs signed Mitch Moses?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know about Mitch and Cody because personally, I see them both as players that have a tendency to go missing.
Yeah.
You need sort of at least one half that's always going to be present, So I think Dylan Brown brings that to Mitch Moses. But I guess, that would be a weird one. I did hear the one the other week about, I can't remember who it was that said it, but about us doing a halfback swap with the Tigers. And I was like, no way. I spat the dummy. I was like, no, not happening. Don't want Luke Brooks. No, thanks. But yeah, the only other clubs that you could think of really is Para and the Tigers. And the Tigers, I don't know what they're doing at the moment. They seem to be juggling this whole drama with Madge, which I think I think there's a lot of circumstances at the moment with different coaches where coaches are getting the axe for things that aren't necessarily in their control, where they haven't had a say on the roster or they're going through, I guess, like a rebuild. Or in saying that with the Tigers, they've had quite a number of coaches in the last few years, so they sort of maybe could do with a bit of stability.
Yep. And let's face it, the West Tigers are where rugby league careers go to die. So you don't want anyone from there, and you don't want to see
unless it's Benji Marshall.
Yeah, he's the only one. But Benji's it's funny that their best player they've ever had, and they got rid of him twice.
Yeah, I mean, and the last time they got rid of him wasn't exactly under the best circumstances either. They seem to do that to their long term, I guess they sort of did a similar thing to Robbie Farah as well. Mm-hmm. But Benji Marshall has been very surprising, especially for a guy that's getting on in his league career, and he sort of took a couple of years, I think, to warm back up into it. But he was outstanding last week. I was pretty impressed. I think that he's been a really good addition to the side. Probably don't want him to do that every week. Just because, he's probably not an 80-minute player for the whole year. But yeah, I don't know what the Tigers are doing. That's a good question.
The cool thing about Benji that I've found this year is the way that Wayne Bennett's using him. When he comes on and they've got three playmakers, and it just gives him so much more freedom to go either side of the field, and it's one of those situations where it's just go out and cause havoc. And he does. And it's really weird because there's been times I think that it's a 3-horse race this year between Penrith, the Storm and South. But there's times this year where South it's like they've gone for 20 minutes, half an hour where they've gone into their shell. Yeah. And Benji's shown he can go out there and sort of shake it up. And it might just be the perfect scenario for Wayne Bennett where when he sees them go into their shell, chuck Benji out there and he'll drag them out of it. And, you know, that's an absolute luxury to have that.
Oh, yeah, it's amazing. There's been quite a few games this year already where we've looked shit. And they put Benji on the field and the momentum has totally changed. And you're like, oh, well, where's that been for the last, 30, 40 minutes? Mm-hmm. I think, like, Penrith already, they're unstoppable this year at this rate. They've been, fantastic, especially for such a young side. Melbourne, I think, are always usually up there, whether we like it or not. But I think the funny thing with Souths, and it's a bit biased because, I've followed them my whole life, but I guess the thing with South this year, and even last year as well, was the way that we can swing a game, like when we're not even playing at 100% and they fall asleep for 20 minutes and then they come back out there and blitz it for, the whole second half. Like that second half against the Titans I think it was totally errorless. But the first half, I was like, wow, we're going to get absolutely destroyed by Fafita and pretty much Fafita only. Yeah. So I think it's funny because South, I don't think have quite hit their strides yet. I know they're sitting quite high on the ladder. I know it's still quite early, but it'd be kind of scary to think about what they could do if they actually played a full 80 minutes of football instead of just bits and pieces here and there. I think having Latrell back in a couple of weeks will shift that because it's taken us a few weeks to sort of get into that stride. I did notice in our first game against Melbourne when Benji first went out there, they looked really messy and it was a bit confusing having that extra playmaker. But I think it's something that they've sort of adjusted to as the season goes on, which is expected. I think when you throw new players in the mix that have such a big impact on the side, it takes time for everyone to sort of gel.
Yeah, it does. And it's funny going into we did the preseason preview, I guess. And I said that the team that really scared me was Souths because when they do get on a roll, there's so many players in that side. Like Alex Johnson is a pure try scorer, so he could score from anywhere on the field. Latrell Mitchell, he's getting better and better. The only thing about Latrell is it just seems like he just starts hitting his stride and then he'll get an injury or he gets suspended or something. Oh. And it's so frustrating because he just gets to the edge of oh man, he's going to start tearing teams apart and then something happens and he doesn't play for months or weeks or whatever. So, I mean, that's got to be rough to watch.
It's pretty frustrating. It's sort of handy. I don't think they did it at first last week, but this week they've named Cody Walker at fullback. Mm-hmm. But they ended up putting him back there last week. But I think it sort of surprised me that we managed to hang on so well last year at the back end of the year when he was injured. But for someone to be such a naturally gifted footballer, even at the Roosters as well, he is just one of those standout players. You don't have to, you can't train that into someone. It's just natural. But yeah, it is really frustrating because he finally looks like he's starting to get that momentum and then he gets suspended or he gets injured. So hopefully when he comes back from the suspension, we can sort of get that momentum back and see him at full capacity because he actually looks a lot fitter this year, which is great. Mm-hmm. And I know a lot of people were really doubting his ability at fullback, but I think he slotted into that role so well at Souths. Yeah. And that left edge combination that we have going, you could see last week that we really missed it. And I think we'll miss it for the next couple of weeks. So whether we win or lose a couple of games in the next few weeks is anyone's guess. Because I was pretty sure that we were going to lose last week and we didn't. So it's too hard to tell. But yeah.
It's crazy to think that some people were doubting he could be a good fullback because it took him some time, I think, to get up to speed with where he needed to be positionally and then the different cardio that you've got to have as a fullback as opposed to out in the centres where he could really rely on just his natural strength and that sort of thing. You're on the move all the time as a fullback. But once he got used to that, it was just, you could say it was man, this guy's going to be one of the best fullbacks in the game. All these idiots. I think of the West Tigers who were in talks with him and they're no, we don't want to pay that much for Latrell Mitchell as a fullback. We don't know how he'll be. And it's you idiots, you dummies. I'm really down on the West Tigers at the moment, as you can tell. And last year when he got injured, I think that might have, I mean, that cost the South team, could have cost him a premiership. Like, he was in that sort of form.
Yeah, I think last year, like, and we were finally getting a really good stride with, like, Latrell at the back, and we were killing it, and then it just sort of, and I was like, oh, we're screwed. And then, like, to make it as far as we did last year, that was awesome. But it's no premiership, you know? I'd like to see at least one, maybe more in my lifetime. Still got a long while to go, but it'd be good to see another one in the next few years. But yeah, like, hopefully we can just sort of, he can keep fit and keep the momentum going this year. That would be, like, pretty cool. I don't know if he's going to get called up for Origin or not. I think it's a bit hard to tell. Like, if he did, I'm guessing he would probably get called up at centre, but it's anyone's. Yeah, I think there's a few people that are probably gunning for that position that are hopefully playing it, instead of picking, say, Gutherson and Whiten in the centres again this year. I just, please pick specialist centres.
No, right. The only player that I could see them picking in the centres is Burton. And that's just because Burton is absolutely killing it, and his combination. If they pick Luai and Cleary, and you got Burton in the side, I could see them going in that direction. But I'm like you. I'm just like, stop with the fucking experiments and pick some real centres.
Well, that's the thing, right? Like, it almost last year's Origin almost felt like when we were back in the Laurie Daly days, where the team literally just got picked on loyalty. It didn't feel like there was really any performance sort of levels picked. It was just, yep, you're picked every year sort of thing. So last year I was like, everyone was like, oh, you know, it'll be a whitewash. The Blues will win it. And I was like, one, don't doubt Wayne Bennett, because he'll pull something out that everyone will be shocked by. And two, I don't know, like, do you really need Gutherson and Whiten at centres? Like, you had Crichton last year, you had Campbell Graham. They were all playing. There was a few centres that could have been picked for New South Wales that were playing really well at a club level that it may have cost them the series. I don't want to go that far. But I think if you're going to pick a rep side, you sort of want to, unless they're like a specialist utility, or, you know, say, for example, with Turbo, you put him on the wing if Teddy's a fullback. But in saying that, Turbo's been playing absolutely outstanding since he came back. But whether he can stay injury-free or not, different question. But yeah, I just pick specialist centres. Don't just pick people based on, like, if you've got three fullbacks that are playing really well, but you know that one of them or two of them aren't going to be any good defensively, if you play them in, say, the centres or on the wing, then they miss out. That's just the nature of it.
100%. And I've always got a hard and fast rule where if you're going to pick a State of Origin player and they need to pack a hairband in their kit, don't pick them. Like, it's just, they're out straight away. I just realised something before. You're a Souths fan that, for the most part, really only knows successful Souths teams. Like, do you remember when they were terrible?
Oh, look, yes.
Okay.
As a kid, I do. Like, I watched footy. Like, my whole family support South, so it was sort of, there was no choice. It's support South or don't watch footy. So we used to go to games. They used to lose. There was very few games that we would go to as a family where Souths would win. But I sort of really got into footy probably just before we, like, the year or two before we won the premiership. That sort of, so I do sort of remember the rebuild, but not that well. And I think it's sort of easy to forget now that we've been, like, such a successful club for, you know, so many years, except for, like, a couple of years after the premiership. We sort of fell apart a little bit for a year or two. But apart from that, I don't think we've ever quite been as, like, even at our worst, we haven't been anywhere near as bad as we were pre-premiership.
Yeah. Because, like, Souths fans, for a lot of my life, Souths fans were tortured souls. Like,
we still are, I guess, in a way. Just different.
Just in a different way. Now it's like, oh, man, if we hadn't got that injury, we might have won a premiership. And I used to know Souths fans that would be like, Oh man, if we get 3 wins this year, I'll be pretty happy with that. You know.
Yeah. The expectation was low, and now
Yeah.
it's just a punish to watch us when we like throw away silly games, or someone gets injured, or just little things, and it's like we don't know how good we have it as South supporters now. Like it could be worse. It could be a lot worse.
Exactly.
My dad's been a South supporter since he was a kid, and like when we went to the 2014 grand final, and that was like that was fantastic for him and my uncle, because they've supported South since they were young, and they haven't seen that success in a very long time. So that was a very emotional game for like I think pretty much my whole family. There was lots of tears shed.
Oh.
But yeah, like I don't really remember the unsuccessful Souths. Don't really want to remember it too much. I think it's a good reminder of what we were once upon a time, but hopefully we don't go back to that if we lose Reynolds.
100%. Yeah, it's I'm a big believer in that. You need to have. I would like every fan of a footy club to have at least one premiership that they can say, oh yeah, I saw that. Because like when the Panthers won their first premiership in '91, I was pretty young. And so I didn't really understand the significance of it, if I'm being honest. But then in 2003, I completely understood it. And that's what I consider my premiership. And so when like we lost last year in the grand final, I wasn't devastated because, I'd already had a premiership. Like I'm just happy for my club to be in the mix, be relevant. Because when your team is not relevant, and when you have like season after season where you think to yourself, oh man, if we'd won 4 or 5 more games, we might be in the race for the top 8. They're the worst years for any fan of a footy club.
Yeah, that's true. I was pretty devastated when Penrith lost last year.
Yeah.
I wish they won because we Souths played them the week before, and that was such a tough game of footy. Like it was so close. And I was like, so close. But also I didn't want to play Melbourne in the grand final because Souths have a terrible track record against Melbourne.
Yeah.
But yeah, I feel like the main frustrating thing about the grand final last year was that was pretty much Penrith's to take. And maybe they came out a little bit, maybe overconfident. I don't know what it was, but maybe it was a bit of stage fright, because I can imagine I've never been in a grand final except in OzTag. So I don't quite personally understand that level of significance on a personal level, just from watching and living through other people's success more than anything. And it was a bit of a bummer, to see a team that had been so successful last year and absolutely killed it the whole way through basically that second half of the season after COVID. And then it just felt like it fell apart a bit. But Melbourne are a tough one to beat, which is frustrating.
And the worst team to give away, like their first 10 points, they gave away on basically penalties. And I'm not arguing with the refs or anything about them penalties. Like if you go into a grand final and even if you think the ref is being harsh, you give up 10 points on penalties, you fucked up. And to do it against Melbourne, of all teams.
Yeah, which you can't afford to give penalties away because they'll just run away with it all day. I don't think you can really blame. Unfortunately, you can't blame the ref for that grand final loss.
No. Unless you feel.
Even with, unless you're the Raiders. But even still, I think they're still salty about that. But but I don't think they were robbed of that grand final.
The Raiders always have a reason why they're hard done by, like, the showers were too cold or whatever. There's always
You live in Canberra, mate. It's cold down there all the time. Shouldn't you be used to the cold?
Oh, it's a freezing, frigid bastard of a place.
So I don't know. That was a bit of a bummer last year. It was a bit, you look forward to grand final day because you always want it to be a close one.
Yeah.
You always want it to go down to the last minute. They sort of came close to doing that at the end. Penrith sort of got their stride back, and I was like listening to it in the radio in the car, and I was like, they're so close. And then I got home and was watching it, and I was like, no, it's over.
Yeah, they come home with a wet sail, and it was like, yeah, the Storm it was like the Storm were never in doubt that they'd won the game by that stage.
Yeah.
Now, one of the reasons I got you on the podcast is because you do something that I find very interesting, and sometimes I like talking to people on the podcast who do something that I find I've got an interest in, but I don't know much about. You are into powerlifting.
Yes.
Now, how did you get into powerlifting? And like you've got a competition coming up. I think you said it was in a couple of months from now.
Yeah, in August.
Yeah. Now, how did you start getting into powerlifting? How did that all come about?
I started an office job like back in 2014, 15, and put on a bit of weight, as you do when you're commuting to Sydney and sitting in an office all day.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd sort of been in and out of the gym for a couple of years. And in 2017, I'd played footy the year before, and I enjoyed that. But in the gym, it was always hard to find, I guess, that level of consistency. And I guess a lot of people struggle with that because you want your results, you want to see it quick. And the only way that my personal trainers could keep me interested was by leg pressing heavy weights or doing something like that, heavy squats. So in 2017, I was like, okay. And I saw something about it on Instagram, I think, and I was like, oh, that looks cool. So I signed up for a gym that I knew had a powerlifting coach, and I started going. I did a bit of strength training while I was playing footy in the season, and found that, that sort of gave me a really good, it complemented footy really well.
Yeah.
Not that I played for a good team, but, it was complementing footy, and I was finding that the extra strength was really helping. And plus I'd hurt my shoulder as well. So it was helpful in the sense that I was able to sort of get back a little bit of strength again. And, getting stronger every week is just a really good motivator to keep going. So at the end of 2017, start of 2018, I went into a competition block, and I signed up for a comp, and I found that was pretty much probably the most consistent I had trained in probably ever. I was managing to get into the gym 4 days a week, doing my sessions. I was enjoying it. It was a bit hard, but, it wasn't too hard to the sense that, I was still beginning. So everything was sort of pulled back a little bit. And then I did my first comp, and that was just, I ended up hooked. I was like, I want to do this all the time. It was really fun. The day itself was stressful. I get really nervous before I play a game of footy.
Yeah.
And it was that same feeling of feeling really oh, I can't eat anything. I can't sit still. The adrenaline sort of really got me, and I was like, oh, okay. So I did 2 comps in 2018, and then I had 2019 off because I was finishing uni. But I still sort of kept in the gym training, and I also had a bit of a hip issue. So it was more rehab and sort of keeping myself sane while I did my last year of uni. And then 2020 was, a write-off for most people because the gyms were shut for a couple of months.
Yeah.
But I managed to get a comp in at the end of the year last year, and that just sort of getting back in the gym after training at home for a couple of months, I think last year really sort of reignited that flame again.
Yeah.
Just in the sense that you're working towards something. And I think another benefit that came out of powerlifting for me, and what sort of has kept me going as well, is that for women especially, body image is such a big thing. And, for me as well. And so many girls go to the gym because, they want a bigger ass, or they want a tone, or things like that. And for me, originally getting into the gym was to do that. And then I sort of shifted away from that focus because I wanted to be strong.
Yep.
And I think having the strength training there, your aesthetic changes, your body changes because you build muscle, and it's not a bad thing. So I think that sort of really helped me in that sense too, like from a confidence perspective. Like I feel so much better about my body because I am using it for, like it's strong. Like I can appreciate what my body does for me. I guess that sounds like a bit weird, but you sort of learn to appreciate it because you're like, I'm lifting all this weight like every week. Like you'd have to add up all the kilos that you lift in a week in your training sessions and all the effort that you put into those competitions just for 9 minutes on the platform for the whole day. Like for a total of 9 minutes, you're on that platform and you're putting in, months of work for that. But the payoff is so worth it because you get so much more out of it than just the 9 minutes on the platform.
Yeah. Yeah, I started lifting just free weights myself at home, and I was always like a runner and stuff like that. So doing upper body stuff, I just didn't bother with, and I started just lifting free weights. And as you get stronger and bigger and stuff, you feel like great from it. It's hard to explain how positive that is for you mentally when. Yeah, and it'll just be silly things like you'll have to move a bit of furniture or something and move it. You'll be like, man, I just moved that like a gorilla. That's fantastic,
Or even if you just little things like, picking up multiple bags of groceries under each arm and just like looping them on and walking in the house with, 6 bags of groceries and you're like, I'm only doing 1 trip today, boys. Or even just like at work, like I work in a team full of dudes. And for a while when I started, people were like, oh, no, it's okay, I'll get it. And I was like, nah, it's fine. I can probably lift more than you anyway. Like, just let me get the damn box. It's fine.
How often do you get people say, oh, can you lift me up?
All the time. It became a little bit of a party trick.
Yeah.
Everyone's like, squat me. But like lifting a human is different to lifting a barbell. Trying to explain that to people, and I'm like, don't worry about it. Like, but it is funny, like even just picking people up and the shock on their faces when you can pick them up, or sometimes you shock yourself when, like you were saying, when you move furniture or you go into the bottle and you pick up a case of beer and you're like, this isn't too heavy.
It's the other thing too, like you must see the shock on people's faces when like say they say, oh, lift me up, and they'll grab your arm or something and they see how strong you actually are. Like it's a different thing from someone that's like, oh yeah, I'm a bit stronger. It's like, nah, this is strength sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, like I don't really like to like brag about it just because I'm like, it's, but sometimes when we go places, one of my friends or like my partner will say something like, yeah, Beck lifts. And I'm like, oh, no, just stop, please. I don't want to be carrying people around this party all night.
Oh, geez, that's hilarious. So tell me, like, do you have to taper going into a competition? Because obviously there's weight classes. So, like, do you pick a weight class that that you've got to taper down to, or is it more a case of getting your body to the point where on in this sort of part of the calendar you're going to be at your strongest?
It differs from person to person. Some people will train during their comp prep at a higher body weight, and then they'll cut as they head into comp, or they'll do a water cut depending on how many kilos you need to cut. I personally train lighter, so I've just cut a couple of kilos. I'm in the under 83 weight class, so I've just cut down to 80, and I'll slowly bulk back up to about probably 82-ish, 83 at night maybe, heading into comp. I haven't had to experience a cut into comp, thankfully. I know a few people that do it, but it depends on the person. Some people will do it just because it's more competitive, and it's easier to train at a heavier weight for them to carry that extra couple of kilos and then sort of, cut it off really quick at the end. And then on comp day, they'll be, 3 kilos lighter than they were during their training cycle. But for me, peace of mind is paramount because I am a massive stress head. So at this point in time, just trying to sit comfortably under. Like my last comp, I think that's probably the last comp I competed at about 82 kilos.
Yeah.
The last time I competed as an 84 before that was in 2018 at the end of the year, and I competed at about 79 kilos. But I was thinking about going down to about the next weight class down is 72, which is a pretty big jump when you think about it.
Yeah, that's big.
And so the women sort of get done dirty in the heavier end because the lower weight classes are a little bit closer together. So you can sort of jump between a couple of classes. But then it goes, I think it's like 64, 72, 83. But when I first started out, I was in the open weight class. So I was like 85, 86 kilos. And after I did that comp, I was like, I want to lose a bit of weight and go down into the lower weight class because it's a bit more competitive than the open weight class was.
Yeah.
And I was competing really light for an open girl.
Yeah, I was going to say, did you go in and
going up against the big girls?
Yeah.
No. So there was only a couple of us in that class when I competed. It was like all sort of new people at the first comp I did. Mm-hmm. So I cut down into the weight class below, but I was like halfway through cutting down to about 80 kilos, and they announced a new weight class where the open weight class was split. So it was like under 83, under 100, and then 100 plus is the open weight class.
Okay.
And I was like, damn it, I could have stayed heavier, but I also didn't want to. Like, it was sort of unnecessary extra weight that I was carrying. Yeah. My diet wasn't the greatest. And I was like, nah, it's time to just sort of, get rid of it. But yeah, so I like to sit just under, sort of comfortably enough that I know that if I use a different set of scales, I'm still good.
Yeah. So, like, did you find personally for yourself, like, you drop down to the next weight class down, did you feel that you lost a certain amount of ability to lift weight, or was the discipline that you had to drop down, were you still able to lift the same sort of weight, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. I ended up cutting to about, I think about 74 I was at my lightest. So I got really close. Mm-hmm. And then we went away to Thailand for 3 weeks. So, and then I got home and I was like, I don't want to cut weight anymore. I like food too much.
Yeah.
And plus I was studying like my last semester of uni, but the discipline, I think when I did the initial weight cut from like 86 down to 80,
yeah,
the discipline I needed for that, because my calories were so low, was massive. Like I'd come home and I was cooking dinner for like my partner and I, and he'd be having, 2 potatoes with dinner, and I'd have to have broccoli and cauliflower rice, or like instead of spaghetti, I was having zucchini noodles. Like, and then you've got to like plan your whole week if you're going out for dinner, like to make sure that, you're not going over your calories for the week and you're still going to make the drop that you need to make for that week. I think when I got to 75 kilos, I still had a similar level of strength. I'd probably lost a little bit, but in saying that, I was also rehabbing a bit of an injury too. So it was a bit hard to gauge, like how much strength I'd actually lost. But my deadlift was a little bit under, but I also wasn't peaked for comp. So it's hard to tell. But I think I deadlifted like 150 unpeaked at my lightest, which was pretty good. Yeah. And then I benched like 70 or something, which was more than I'd benched in comp a few months before. Mm-hmm. So the strength was probably still there. And every now and then I have this like little moment where I toss up whether I actually want to do that again. And then I'm like, it's too much.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a lot of commitment. And that's a big chunk of weight to lose. That'd be nearly 10 kilos if I was to do that now. So I'm like, maybe one day, but right now I'm pretty comfortable at about 80 kilos. Like, I like how my body looks. Everything works as it should. Mm-hmm. I enjoy, eating for fuel and just for the enjoyment of eating. Mm-hmm. Because I love food, and I'm one of those people that will plan my dinner for tonight. I'm like, what can we have for dinner tomorrow? And I'm I'm still cooking dinner for tonight or something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think discipline is a big thing with weight loss. And I think that's where, like, in the past, I know I've gone really wrong because that's probably the biggest amount of weight I've ever cut. It's been it was a very slow progression of weight gain over the years because, life happens.
Yeah.
And you never realize until it's too late. So, and I was, getting upset because all my clothes weren't fitting and I didn't feel comfortable in how I looked and I didn't feel like great. And appearance isn't everything, but I think when you're having those sort of feelings, and a lot of people, like I was saying before, like everyone wants results and they want to see it now. But if you actually put in the hard yards, it is worth it. And sometimes you don't realize how big the change is until you're finished and you look back as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah.
I know before I'd started lifting weights, and I didn't put on heaps of weight, but before I'd started lifting weights, I was like, I'll do this to, something to do. And I remember there was one day I put on a T-shirt and I was like, what's wrong with this T-shirt? It's like, the last time I put this on, it wasn't this big. I loved it. It was fantastic. It was just the best.
It's great. I had that feeling last year, but it was a bit different with going back to the office last year because I didn't wear, my office clothes for like a good 6 months, I reckon, last year. And then we started going back to the office a couple of days a week and I was like, oh shit, better crack out the button-ups just to see how they look. And I'd lost a little bit of weight because I'd started with a new coach and I'd started training again and, I was getting back into my stride, but I'd put a bit of muscle on during lockdown because I was training at home and I put some of my button-up shirts on and I was like, oh, my shoulders, I feel like I'm going to burst out. In White Chicks when he wears that leather suit and he comes out of the dressing room and he's all hunched over. Sometimes it feels like that when I put a jacket or a shirt on and I'm like, oh, shit, I really liked that too and I can't wear it anymore.
Yeah, I did that with a couple of shirts where I was like, I feel like if I just I could do an Incredible Hulk. Just tear them apart. And part of you is like, oh man, this shirt costs too much to do it, but I really want to do it. So yeah. The other thing I want to ask you about is the weird situation where you can drop weight but be bigger, and vice versa. So you'll be. It's a weird situation where you can be working out, but you're actually putting on weight if you just go by scales, and it can play with your head a little bit where you're like, I'm working really hard. Why am I X number of, it might be a kilo or a kilo and a half bigger since you last weighed yourself. And it's because you don't always look, massive. It's a weird sort of situation.
Yeah, it is. And I think sometimes you're like, why am I so heavy all of a sudden? And then you're like, oh, I'm eating a lot of food and I'm training every day.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. But yeah, I think it's funny for me because the last time for a while, I think I hit last year at my heaviest because I did a little bit of a gain and then I did a bit of a cut. So I've sort of been cycling through maintenance and then bulking up a little bit and then cutting. And I've never really done a bit of a, not so much a massive bulk. It was just a little bit just to sort of build the kilos back on. And it's funny looking back because I hit about 84 kilos and I was like, that's weird. I had not seen the scales creep up like that in a while. So getting into that mindset of actually being comfortable with the scales going up because that's what you're aiming to do as well, I think can be a bit of a weird thing too.
Yeah.
But in saying that, I hit about 84 kilos and I was like, my body looks so different to what it did the last time I weighed 84 kilos. And even looking back, it came up on my Instagram memories, I think a month or so ago, a photo of my sister and I when we played our first game of league together. And I looked at my legs and I was like, my legs were so skinny. Was I really, I thought that I remember looking back on photos of when I was in my early 20s or even in high school. And I was like, I thought I was fat.
Yeah.
And there's no way, looking back at that, I was tiny. I was I've always been tall and always never been stick thin. But I was like, my legs were so little. Like my arms and shoulders were so small. Like it's a bit funny. Sometimes it throws you out a little looking at those photos because you're like, wow, I didn't realize like how different I looked now.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a good change. But sometimes it throws me out a little because I'm like, oh, that shirt fitted me 6 months ago and now it doesn't.
Yeah.
So I'm going to have to go get a new wardrobe. Everything has to be stretchy is my new criteria. Just because at least that way it's got give either way.
Now, the other thing I wanted to ask you is like, so when you go, like say you have time off from lifting and you might not be working out as much, do you find that it is easier to, because you've been up at a certain weight and a certain size in terms of muscle mass, is it easier to get back to that than it is for someone to start out and try and get to a certain level? Because I found that like when I've stopped lifting weights and I'll lose the muscle mass, but I feel like I can get back really quickly when I want. Is that something is like common in weightlifting as well?
I think so. And I think it sort of depends probably on how long you've been doing it and how much muscle mass you have as well. So I had a bit of time off, which sort of timed in with like the gym shutting. So I sort of got to a point where I was like, I just need a bit of a break. I wasn't enjoying my training. I wasn't in a great mental state. And I was like, I need a break. Like this is all like, it's too much. So I put my gym membership on hold and then the gym shut like a week or two later and I was like, geez, okay, talk about timing. And it took a little bit for me to get back into it. Just because I guess, the state of the world at that time, everyone was a bit stressed, you couldn't buy toilet paper. No one knew what was going on with their jobs. We couldn't go anywhere or do anything really. So it was a bit of a weird one. But I think I enjoyed the time off because I think I really needed it just to sort of like process everything that was happening. And also just my body needed the break. And then getting back into it again, I don't think it was too bad. I'd sort of done a little bit of training here and there at home, like made up like a really quick random program. And then I was doing like a bit of boxing and more like just not using my car and walking if I needed to go somewhere, just to get out of the house more than anything. But yeah, I guess it sort of depends. It probably differs person to person. And it also really depends how much time you have off as well. Like I know if I have like, 3-4 weeks off, which I have in the past, if we've gone on holiday, I come back and if I was to do the same thing that I was doing before I left, I would not be able to walk the next day. But I think people underestimate how easy it is to get back to where you were before once you've set that really good base too. So once you've sort of got that muscle mass there, your body like remembers. Once you do it, start going again, like it might take you a couple of weeks. It's not going to happen overnight. It's not like you go back to the gym after 4 weeks off and you have one session and you're like, yeah, I'm ripped again, sick. But yeah, I think it really depends. For me, it probably takes me a couple of weeks to get back to it. Just because, especially, I reckon at least the first 2 weeks back, are a punish because you're so sore. Your body's like, what on earth is happening? Like, why are you moving like that again?
Do you embrace that pain though?
Oh, sometimes. Sometimes I think we underestimate like what our bodies are capable of. I think, but there's also a line like you sort of want to work smarter, not harder. Like, so you don't always want to work to failure every session. You sort of want to leave a little bit in the tank, and you also don't want to wake up the next morning after every leg day you do and not be able to walk. And I think I've gone wrong with that in the past, and I think a lot of people still go wrong with it in the sense that people think you have to go hard in the gym, and you don't. Like, I was previously training 4 days a week, and then I started with my new coach, and I get through most of my like off seasons with 3 days a week training. But I am in the gym for like 2 hours at a time, so I guess it's sort of it may as well be nearly 4 days. But I think that's something I really learned last year when I changed coaches and I started training again, was sometimes less is better.
Yeah, and
Sometimes
it's
feeling more
interesting.
recovered actually benefits you.
Yeah, it's like I know that just from hearing athletes and trainers and stuff talking over the last 10 to 15 years, the move away from training to failure has been pretty big. And
Yes.
that's something I know when I started lifting my weights again, that's something I really focused on, was like, don't lift until you can't lift anymore. That's stupid. Like, because you'll be able to lift tomorrow and the next day, and it must be extra important in powerlifting where when you get to that failure, sort of area, all of a sudden your technique and stuff starts going out the window because you're just trying to get the weight up.
Yeah. And I think like there is a place for, I'm not going to say failure, but like close to, mainly when you're like at the back end of a training block.
Mm-hmm.
And you're getting close to, like a deload week, or say, for example, when you get into a peak for a comp, everything is so fucking hard. Like, and you move like your heaviest top singles, like absolute dog shit. And then on comp day, they move like an absolute dream. Like, yeah. And it's funny because your body builds up so much fatigue and you don't think about it. But yeah, I think there has been and I think something that's really come along in the last, few years especially, is how important recovery is too. Yeah. Like not just, stretching or anything like that, but sleep is a big one. Like I know if I go to the gym, sometimes I have to train after I've been in Sydney all day. And at the moment, because of last year working from home so much, it is so hard to go to sleep early and get up early to go to Sydney for work. So like, and you can feel the difference when you're training on, 5-6 hours sleep compared to a solid 8. Yeah. And people really underestimate how much that comes into your weight loss too. Like if you're not sleeping like 8 hours a night, you might not see that shift on the scales. It's not just, you've got to be in a calorie deficit, but if you're not recovering properly, and you're not getting enough sleep, your body's not going to have time to recover. And, like it makes everything harder.
Yeah. I've also heard that they believe that when you've been training physically in whatever activity your discipline is, that when you go to sleep that night, it connects neurons and stuff in your brain. Like that's when that happens. And so it's not just the moment that you're learning something while you're awake. It's also really important to get a good night's sleep because it makes sure everything sort of beds down and stays, in your brain sort of thing, which you would never have thought about. Like the one of the most important things with training is making sure you get a good night's sleep after it.
Yeah. Well, like I think I read something, maybe it was like a couple of weeks ago, about like professional athletes. Some professional athletes sleep like 12 hours a night. And I'm like, I wish I had the time to sleep that much every night. But I would probably still wake up exhausted because sometimes I feel like 12 hours is too much. Like just give me like a good 8 to 10 hours sleep and I'm good. But anything less, because I used to think, like I could run off next to no sleep every day, but you can't. Like your body's not built for that unless you're one of those people. I think there's like a very small percentage of the population or something that actually sleep better, like, or function better when they've had 5 hours sleep. And some people think that they're part of that population, but they're not.
100% not. Yeah, for sure. I know for me, I used to be able to go on, like, if I had 4 hours sleep, that was plenty. But now it's like if I have less than 7, I'm a brain dead moron that is of no use to anyone.
Yeah, pretty much. Well, like I used to go, like when I first started working up in Sydney, because I travel from Wollongong. And when I first started working up there, I was going to work on, 4 or 5 hours sleep. And now I look back on that and I'm like, that's insane. Like I was insane. I was insane to think that I was going to be able to do anything on that much sleep. Like if I get that much sleep now, I'm like, ugh. Like, that you're in for it. Absolute shit show of a day if you don't get more than at least 7 hours. Yeah. But yeah, like I think people really underestimate that aspect too. Like it's not just about getting into the gym and you don't have to train like an absolute animal. And sometimes I think people also like the consistency aspect of training too. Sometimes your training has to be boring because you have to do the same thing over and over again to see results.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's no point in changing your program every week. You're not going to get the same thing out of that as you would doing the same program for, 8 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
I've been doing the same program since December now, so I'm a bit like, ugh. But I'm also getting really close to starting my comp block. So I'm like, light at the end of the tunnel. So close. So close. Like variety is good, don't get me wrong. And that's what I guess a powerlifting off season is for. Like I haven't squatted, benched or deadlifted since my comp. I've been doing like variations of them. But I haven't actually done like the proper comp style in 4 months or something like that, which it's been a nice change because you sort of get sick of it. And it also, like it's the off season is sort of just to, strengthen, build the muscle so that you've got a good base going into comp. But yeah, like people think that training has to be fun all the time. Sometimes it's not. Like my coach said to me a couple of months ago, he's like, sometimes it's about having like dedication over motivation. And I was like, that is so true. Like if you're really that dedicated to, getting the result that you want, whether it's, competition or aesthetic based or something like that, even on days that you don't feel like it, sometimes you just have to get up and do it. We all do things that we don't necessarily love to do. But if you have that goal in mind, then if you really want it, you'll work for it.
Yeah, yeah. Now, how much of powerlifting is horsepower and how much of it is technique?
I think technique is something that is really drilled into you when you first start out. And I guess like depending on your coach and depending on how experienced they are as well, that can change from coach to coach. I've personally found every coach I've gone to, there's always a slight tweak. And technique in powerlifting, for a lot of people, it's about making the lift as efficient as possible. Like I have really long legs, so I'm not built for squatting or deadlifting. Long femurs don't assist. Long arms don't assist with benching, but here we are. So I think technique does have its place. And I guess for some people, like you look at like the way that some powerlifters do their bench, for example, like powerlifters have an arch, and you generally when you bench, you want to have a little bit of that arch anyway to protect your shoulders and keep everything in place when you're benching. But
now,
powerlifters
is this where, because I saw a video you posted, man, it might have been last year or the year before, where you're benching, but your back is arched really high.
Yep.
Is that this? Okay.
Yes. Yep. So, and people are like, why do you do it like that? Like, what about your back? Are you going to break your spine? And I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm good. But you do that sort of not just to protect your shoulders, but like the bigger the arch, the less range you have to move that bar too. So for people with long limbs, it comes in handy because you're like lessening the range of movement that you have to go. So powerlifting, you've got your rules in place, but people like to stretch how far they can push it. Like some people will squat with a really wide stance, or, people will deadlift with a sumo stance, but really far apart. And the wider you have your legs, the less room between you and the floor.
Yeah.
I can't do that personally. I can arch, but that's about it in bench. So I think technique does have a place in it because you want to make the lift as efficient as possible. And you also want to make sure that when you're lifting at that capacity, that your technique, you're not like totally breaking down in technique. Like there's always going to be like, I guess, a little bit of a breakdown. Nothing is going to be perfect. And that technique differs from person to person, depending on how your body is built. I probably would say that technique probably has a little bit more in it because you're keeping your body like safe.
Yep.
So you're not going to hurt yourself, and you also know how to handle it, and you're not going to, dump the weight halfway through your squat, or you're not going to miss a command because like when you squat, when you walk out of the rack, you can't go until the judge says squat. And sometimes that could be a couple of seconds, depending on how long it takes you to walk out of the rack and the bar settles. So you got to take a big breath, and you're literally waiting for the ref in front of you to put their hand down and yell squat. And then when you come back up, they say rack. So you have to pay so much attention, and so many people beat those commands and you get a no lift. So, and that's the same with bench too. When you drop the bar down to your chest, it has to be still on your chest, and then the ref will say press, so you can push it back up, and then they say rack. And if you're not training for that in comp, training for that before comp, like, you're probably going to miss it. Unless, by some miraculous, or you've been training with really long pauses or something like that. Like, you have to pay attention. So not only are you lifting a ridiculous amount of weight that you may not have lifted in the gym, you're doing it in front of a heap of people, and then you have to listen to the judges at the same time to make sure that you're not doing things at the wrong time, so that you can get that as a good lift as well. I think
how often do people just pass out weight?
I don't know. I've never seen that. There's been, I think there's been a few videos that come up on Instagram every so often of people vomiting when they squat or deadlift, and I'm like, oh, that's a nightmare. And women sometimes pee on the platform when they deadlift. But I've never seen. I've seen a video of someone passing out at the top of a deadlift, actually, when they were locking it out. And I was like, oh, I hope that never happens to me.
I need to see that video. Holy crap.
I'll have to find it. There was one a couple of months ago, I think.
Yeah, that's that's crazy, locking it out and then they pass out. What, the worst time to do it?
Yeah, well, I think they dropped the bar, which is good. But I mean, I can understand why it happens, because the amount of adrenaline that goes through your body and the amount of energy that you're using to lift that weight as well, is insane. But yeah, no thanks.
So how, going into a competition, is that, do you lift for a certain number of days going into competition day so that your muscles are fresh, or is it the complete opposite? You lift right up to it?
So you usually have a peak. It depends, but typically about 2 weeks out, you finish your peak. So for about 2 weeks, so you say when you're about 3 weeks out, you start your peak, and that is death, because you're physically exhausted and you still have to go in and do your top squat, your top bench, your top deadlift for the cycle.
Mm-hmm.
And you're mentally fatigued. So you're peak week for me is the worst.
Yeah.
You're mentally foggy, you're tired. Everything is heightened because you're just so exhausted from, the accrued fatigue. So you peak, and then in the week leading into comp, you usually do 3 days. Mm-hmm. And again, depends on the coach and their approach to comp day. So I've done 2 different approaches into comp day. Both of them work pretty well. Both of them were a 3-day, and you do your last day about 3 days out from comp. So you have 2 full days off before you compete. One of them was doing everything at 40% squat, bench, deadlift, lifting at about 60% or something like that, doing a really quick deload week. The other approach is a taper where you do maybe a top squat and bench, then you deadlift on the second day, and then on the last day you'll do a lighter squat and a heavy bench, and you don't do any accessories, and then you go home. And by that point you're totally fucked. But then it's funny how quickly you recover as well, because I remember my last session before comp last year, I was I am dead, and I had failed my heavy bench on the Monday, and the Wednesday came around and I had to do it again, and I was oh god, this is going to be a shit show. I was so tired the other day, and I'm still absolutely dead now. But it's amazing how quickly your body recovers from the taper, because you're very suddenly sort of cutting it off.
Yeah.
You sort of do those 3 days, but you're just going in to do those top lifts just to sort of keep grease the groove. And then you have the time off, and you general rule of thumb is you go into comp day feeling pretty good.
Yeah.
But yeah, like the peak into comp, I reckon, is like the hardest part because you've already been training pretty hard for, like 12 weeks. It sort of builds up over time.
Yeah.
But by the last couple of weeks, you're like, I'm so done. Like, take me into comp day. Just carry me. I don't want to do it anymore.
And do you ever have days where you'll think to yourself, oh man, I just haven't got it today, and then you go in and you'll lift a personal best, or vice versa, where you're like, I'm feeling so strong, I'm going to throw these things around today, and it's just super disappointing?
I think I've become a bit better at sort of gauging like where I'm at. Sometimes I think I underestimate. Like sometimes I'll feel like absolute shit, and I'm like, the last thing I want to do today is go sit in the gym for a couple of hours and knock out this session. And then I get there and I start and I'm like, oh, okay, like I actually feel really good.
Yeah.
Or you'll do your last warm up and you're like, that move like asshole. Like, I don't know how this is going to go. And then you do your top single or you do your heavy set and you're like, oh, okay, we're good. I don't really go into the gym like cocky or anything just because, like I'm in the gym. I just want to be left alone in the gym more than anything. The gym is my escape. That's my me time. So I like to go in and just sort of like not so much cruise, but just go in and get it done. Unless I'm like, dragging myself along the floor after work and I'm like, I don't want to go, but I have to go today. This prep will be a bit interesting because I'm playing like AFL at the same time. So I don't know how much fatigue I'm actually going to get from games yet.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's going to be the interesting part. And then I guess because I've been trying to do at least one day of training with the team because I feel like that's something, you need to do if you're committing to the team sport. You've got to at least go to one training day. I don't want to be that guy that turns up on game day and hasn't been at training all week. But yeah, so I think this one will be a bit interesting because I'm probably going to have to cut AFL training out for a little bit.
Yeah.
Just to because I'm going to probably be training 4 days a week.
Yeah.
And I don't really want to be training the day after a game because that's going to be like my sleep day.
Yeah. And you got your priorities.
Yeah. So I don't know. It'll be an interesting prep. I'll have a couple of weeks off AFL before I go to Melbourne to compete. Because like I don't think I'll be able to function as a human by peak week. Like there's no way that I can run around a field and play AFL while I'm peaking for comp. Like I would probably collapse in the middle of the field and be like, nah, I'm having a nap.
I tell you what, on an AFL field, you must scare the shit out of some of the girls you're playing against when they run into stuff. I haven't
played yet. I'm actually playing my first game on Saturday.
There you go.
So it'll be interesting. Yeah. Everyone said that they're like, oh, like you're gonna have to smash some people, and I was like, oh, maybe they're gonna be too quick.
That must be the other thing too. Everyone just like assumes you're going to attack everything in life like the Incredible Hulk.
Yeah. Everyone's like, oh, come on, you're strong, you can do it. Like a couple of months ago, I was helping my dad mow the back lawn, and our back lawn, like the grass is so thick. Yeah. And I was mowing the lawn and I got halfway through and I tapped out. And our lawnmower was really heavy and I was like, I can't do this. Like, it's too hard. I don't want to mow the lawn anymore. And he's like, you can go spend 3 hours in the gym every night, but you can't mow the lawn. And I was like, yes, I don't have the cardio for this.
Shit. By the way, what position did you play when you played rugby league?
So in my first year, I played on the wing. Yeah. And I was probably like the biggest winger. And then my second year, I played like a bit of a mix of front row, second row, which was heaps more fun. Yeah. And I think I knew a bit better what I was doing by that point too. So I didn't play for like the best team. Like we got flogged nearly every week. I think we came second last the second year I played. The first year I played, we came last. We didn't win a game.
Yeah.
And then the second year I played, we won, I think like 2 games or something.
Yeah.
But it was good fun. I kind of miss it. Like I played Oz tag for a bit after. Mm-hmm. But I also don't miss waking up on a Sunday morning feeling like I've been hit by a bus.
Yeah.
And I did my shoulder, like playing footy too, because like I think people underestimate like good tackle technique, and we didn't learn it because, it's just a local women's league comp.
That must have been scary because like you must have been thinking, how's this going to affect my lifting?
Yeah, well, I actually initially heard it playing Oz tag because some dude dropped his shoulder into me when I went to pick the ball up and nearly knocked me out. He must have forgotten that we were playing Oz tag, not league. So I initially like sort of niggled it a little bit, and then I think I totally flared it up playing league because I was always tackling with my right shoulder. I'm very right hand dominant because, I write with my right hand. I, like move the mouse around with my right hand, carry my handbag. So it was a bit of a tough one because I did that whole first 2 comp preps pretty much like while I was nursing like tendonitis in my rotator cuff. Yeah. And that was brutal. Like anytime anyone says to me, yeah, I've got problems with my rotator cuff, I'm like, I can relate. That is not a fun time. So it actually took me and it was something that took a long time to sort of get to a level where I wasn't getting any more pain. Like I think last year and this year is like the most consistently I've gone without any pain in that shoulder. And like it became something that I was so used to because you get so used to just living with like everything so tight and uncomfortable. So I miss league, but then at the same time I'm like, I would rather just watch it from a distance and not go back there again. I thought about doing it again and then I was like, nah, with like powerlifting. And then I was like, now I'm like, you dickhead, you're playing AFL, but I guess it's a different sort of contact in a way. So I don't know. It'll be interesting. I've just sort of been like picking up the rules as I go with training, and I've been watching like the boys play. And I'm like, this is just the most chaotic thing I've ever seen. Like, because league has so much structure to it, and you know where you're meant to be. The ball follows in a line, and you go back and forth up the field. But in AFL, it's like someone drops the ball and it's a free for all. And then
it's like watching seagulls fighting over a chip.
Yeah, it is. And I was like, this is chaos. Like, how do you even... And then the momentum of the game can shift so quickly too. Like, one team will have the ball and they'll be kicking it across the field or passing it or whatever. And then all of a sudden the ball's going in the total opposite direction and you're like, what? Blink and you'll miss it. I guess that happens in league sometimes. But, like, it's really different. And trying to get my head around it, like, even just handballing, like, I know I'm going to get pulled up for passing the ball. I'm going to be like throwing it like a league ball and be like, oh shit.
Well, it's going to be interesting to see how you balance the two disciplines. And it's like, look, the powerlifting thing, and I've direct messages sometimes asking about the different things you're doing and stuff. I find it really fascinating, especially to talk to a female that got into it and did it like naturally, in terms of it wasn't something the whole family did and she got into it. It's like something you kind of did yourself. So it's, I'm so glad we got a chance to talk about it.
Yeah, I think it's something that's definitely getting bigger with women as well. Like the first comp I competed in, there was more girls than there were dudes, which is pretty fantastic. Like, so the whole morning session was all women and the whole afternoon session was men. Yeah. So it's something it's getting bigger. And I mean, hopefully I'd like to think that I could talk a few people into doing it. I'm trying to talk my sister into doing it at the moment because she talked me into league and AFL. So I was like, all right, I'm going to have to talk you into this. But I think it's also something that a lot of people don't know about. Like, who knew that you could compete by doing something? It's not like necessarily simple, but you don't have to, you don't have to be fit and raring to go. You don't have to be like an athlete persona type to do it. And it's a competitive sport, but in saying that, everyone is still really supportive, which I think is massive. Like, everyone will cheer you on the platform. It does not matter how much weight you're lifting.
That's awesome. Like, that's awesome because it's funny because there are some competitive environments where everyone's out against each other. And then there's other ones where it's like, man, like just, you broke the record. That's fantastic. Someone was going to get it. And that's cool that powerlifting's that way.
Yeah, it's such a supportive like environment, and it's for like any age. Like there's people from like all walks of life that do it, which is pretty cool. Like I think it's pretty awesome to be able to go and, you know, see some of the oldies out there powerlifting, or, you know, like I think you can do it from like 16 and up or something. Yeah. Maybe younger. I don't know. Actually.
How do you get into it? Just say somebody's listening and they want to get into powerlifting. What's the first way thing
There's
they do?
A couple of different ways you could do it. It just sort of depends on the area you live in as to how big certain federations will be. As well. There's a few different federations that float around. There's two main drug-tested federations in Australia. So that's Powerlifting Australia, and then you've also got the Australian Powerlifting Union as well. Mm-hmm. But the main thing that I would say to people is if they want to give it a go, I think most places, like most areas, have novice comps.
Yeah.
If you really want to give it a go just to see what it's like without having to pay all the money for the belt and the soft suit and all the gear, sign up for a novice comp. Mm-hmm. I did the expensive way and signed up straight away for a registered comp. But like looking back in hindsight, I mean, it's lucky that I loved it and I caught the bug. But for most people that ask me how to get into it now, I just, you know, find a coach that can, like a strength coach, or if you can, a powerlifting coach. Most of them will say that they're specialized in, you know, powerlifting. And hit them up. And if you want, do a novice comp, or maybe if you really think that you can commit to it, sign up for a federation, give it a go. It doesn't hurt. I mean, worst case, if you don't like it, you don't have to do it again.
Yeah.
But I don't think I really know anyone that's done it and hated it. So yeah, you just sign up for a novice comp or sign up for any competition or federation really. And make sure you have a coach, of course.
Yeah.
And just give it a go. Like that's all I can recommend to people is you're not going to know unless you do it. And it's so much fun. I wish I could explain to people like how fun comp day is. It's stressful, like stressful as fuck, but it's also and chaotic as fuck, but it is so much fun. And it's such a, you know, like diverse, like welcoming environment, like all kinds of people do it. You don't have to be so-called strong to do it. Like it does not matter. Like people will get up there and cheer you on regardless of what level you're at.
Well, that's awesome. I'm so glad we got a chance to talk, and good luck in the competition when it comes up. We'll all be cheering for you.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's man, like if you win it, you got to let us know.
I will. You'll hear all about it on Twitter.
Yeah. Well, actually, if you win it, we'll get you back on, right? And you can just brag. You can talk shit about all your competitors. Just like.
Just a humble brag. Just get back on the podcast and talk about it for an hour.
You can sound like the Panthers, bloody arrogant bastards.
So arrogant.
So where can people find you, and have you got anything to promote?
People can find me on Twitter at Beck _ or on Instagram at Rebecca.Tenchevsky. But yeah, that's pretty much me. Nothing to promote, just myself.
Excellent. Well, you know what? You're my favorite female powerlifter. So there you go.
Oh, thank you. So kind.
Well, thanks for everyone for listening. If you want to get in touch, go to fergunthefreak.com, go to the contact section, send us an email, and we'll read it out on the podcast eventually. And once again, thanks for joining us, Beck.
Thank you so much for having me.